Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Welcome to our Baptist Health Ask an Expert series or session. This is the second part of our Coping with COVID Family Edition series. And as some of you know, this month, May, is Mental Health Awareness Month. And again, we're just continuing this conversation on, stress, mindfulness, mental health in general, just as, a way to help us with some coping strategies or tools that maybe you can put in your own toolbox. But let's go ahead and get started. Cal, thank you so much for being back with me this week. I'm excited for us to talk about stress less. But before we do that, I wanted to see if you had anything for maybe our viewers who weren't able to tune in with us last week, just a reflection on what we talked about for mindfulness.
Sure, sounds good. Thanks, Jean. Great to be here again with you. Let's pick up on last time. So we talked really about stress in the context of mindfulness and how can mindfulness be helpful? Why does mindfulness matter? And with that, we landed on the idea that mindfulness, yes, is about relaxation, but predominantly, first and foremost, it's about observation and noticing what's happening in our mind and noticing what's happening in our body and our surrounding environment. And the other aspect of mindfulness being about tapping into our innate wisdom, the idea of knowing that we know really what the next step is to take. We know what's most essential to us. We know what's most important. If only we can just take that time just to be with ourselves, even when it's difficult. So that was really mindfulness in that context. And we had a great question about how can we work with someone who maybe we're having difficulty communicating with. And we talked about the PAL model, which is purposeful, agendaless listening. So if anyone from last week can relate to that, or they implemented it, please drop a note in the chat box. And we want to make this, as we did last time, as interactive as possible. So we'll really be looking out for your questions, any thoughts you might have, or anything like that. Just let's make it as much of an informal conversation as we can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see we have Fran back with us this week, and she said, "Hey, pal." So that was something that was impactful for her. But yeah, and I think that I'm so happy that you kind of went over that, because mindfulness isn't the only thing that can help us, in our day-to-day in coping with this new kind of maybe schedule, or, being together with your family a little bit more than we used to, right? So there's also some, stress relieving techniques, which is what we're going to be talking about today, and how to maintain a positive home, right? But so Cal, I don't know, are you ready? We can get into some questions.
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, perfect. So let's start off with the hard one. So what are some tools or techniques to use to de-escalate stress in the heat of the moment? Which I have to say, for myself, I'm still learning every day.
Yeah, I think the context of dealing with stress in the moment, we can't really ignore the fact that we have a tolerance level, we have a window of tolerance, and once we go beyond that, it becomes really difficult to be present in the moment. So in a lot of ways, the work we do to, and we'll talk about this in a moment, the work we do to manage stress in the moment is actually done way in advance by front loading our work around mindfulness, around finding joy, gratitude. All these things that do reduce stress are really important to do in advance. And in a sense, in the heat of the moment, we can often say that all bets are off. And, we've all been there where we've hit our limit, and maybe we say or do something we don't mean, or extend ourselves in a way that is maybe more harmful than helpful. But in that moment, if we look at the idea of compassion in the context of stress, what does compassion actually mean? What does it look like? Well, compassion, first part of compassion is about awareness and being aware of our feelings and the feelings of others. The second part is a commitment to alleviating suffering. So what does that actually mean in the heat of the moment? Well, oftentimes in the heat of the moment, what that means is the best thing that we can do if we're really struggling or if we've hit a limit is to leave with the idea of coming back and just giving ourselves permission to say, this is not helpful. Let's leave and come back if it's in the context of maybe a relationship tension or conflict. Now, of course, that's more difficult to do if we're talking about being with a young child. But it's just this sense of stepping back from the situation and coming back to it. And so, of course, we work with the breath as well. The breath is the first and foremost place that we go in order to down-regulate difficult emotions, down-regulate and soothe really intense feelings of maybe anger or hurt. And let's all do that together now, because there's nothing better than just practicing. So a nice way to approach this is really to think about a timing with this. So it can be as simple as just in our mind saying in and out, but we may actually just add a count. So what we might do altogether, who forever's watching, is we'll breathe in for a count of say 5, and we'll hold for a count of 5, and we'll exhale for a count of 8. So let's all do that together, and maybe we'll do 1 or 2 cycles of this together. So on my count, if everyone's ready, let's breathe in for a count of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and holding for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and exhaling now for 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and relax and rest. And let's just try that one more time all together. So breathing in all together for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, holding the breath for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and fully exhaling for 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, and just noticing what that feels like. And the reason why we extend the exhale is so that what we really know is that as we release some of the carbon dioxide, some of the toxins that lie within our body, we give our body the opportunity to reset, to recalibrate our autonomic nervous system. So that's why the exhale is so important. So almost extending the exhale and having that as the emphasis becomes more important than the inhale when we're trying to relax in the midst of an anxious time.
Yeah. And I felt even more relaxed. And I know, we don't breathe like that every day, right? So it may, I know for me, it was felt a little weird, but at the same time, you're kind of focusing that concentration, and seems like away from those emotions and on your breath. So I really like that. I feel more calm. So thank you for that.
Good, that's the aim. That's why we're here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually kind of had a thought about this de-escalation, kind of in the heat of the moment. So, there are ways, obviously, we can do that, but of course, we're all human, right, Cal? And I know I've made the mistake of, doing that awful thing in the moment, right? And so what in follow-up would you say? Let's just say, for my example, for my 3-year-old, and I accidentally raised my voice at him. But then I'm like, oh no, I made a mistake. What do I do after that?
Okay.
To help us by the situation.
So let's think about it in this term. When you, in your mind, you say, I make a mistake, what then happens? Do you get on with the rest of your day? Or does that, I made a mistake?
I feel like I have this need to resolve it before I can move on with my day.
Mm-hmm. So there's a need to resolve it. And also there's a sense that that same thought about what happened is kind of reverberating around your mind. And so we have to work with what's going on inside of us in order to try and resolve the situation. So we can talk about this in the context of the second arrow, which is a quite well-known term. It says to say the first arrow that we shoot is the experience of the pain that we feel of regret, of, oh man, I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
After that, the arrows that we fire, the second, third, fourth arrows, are not essential. They're really harmful to our experience. That is to say, we beat ourselves up over and over again. So the first arrow we can learn from is the pain. It's the sense of, man, I wouldn't have done that way. I would have done it differently. But just noticing in our own minds what that does to our own sense of well-being as we beat ourselves up over the head, so to speak, with a cudgel over time. So that would be the first thing to work with, I think, is our own inner critic, our own sense of how could you have done that, and allowing that to keep on going. So how do we do that? And again, it starts with mindfulness, but this next part of that is the intention that we bring to our mind. So Kristen Neff is a leading expert on compassion. She talks about how we work with our inner critic, and she draws on three core ideas, one being mindfulness, one being common humanity, and one being compassion. So common humanity is the sense that, we're all in this together, trying to figure it out. We're all doing the best that we can with what we have. We're flawed in many ways, and we have a mind that doesn't always do what we want it to do. And just this sense of togetherness in that experience, and that we're all going through struggles in our own way. The mindfulness aspect is being aware of our surroundings, as we talked about before, and the compassion aspect is just bringing that intention in the midst of this. How do I want to be? So in the midst of this regret, what's going to be important for me? And maybe for you, Jean, you have your ideas about what's important. Is it maybe if I can suggest, would it be something like wanting to being caring of Cole, or being compassionate to his experience? Is that where you start with it, or is it something else, or is it just a sense of restoring balance in your relationship with Cole, or what's the thing?
I would say probably restoring balance, and really for myself, it's like, oh, I made this mistake. And I realized that. And so we come together to restore that balance. And then, of course, I apologize and say, Mommy, we'll do better next time, or something like that.
Yeah. Okay, great. So if it's about restoring balance, then you have a commitment to Cole. You also have a commitment to yourself in terms of restoring balance, which means that actually that mind that beats yourself up over it, actually we have to find a way to be kinder, more gentle to that mind that is trying to figure it all out. And so, yes, it is about restoring balance with Cole, also about restoring balance in your own mind as well, and giving yourself some grace and a break. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And really good, I think, really good advice that I'll definitely take. And I hope for our viewers too, because it goes along with not just a toddler, but any family member, right, Cal? Whether it be your spouse, your, whoever lives with you. That's a big deal.
Yeah, and it can be so. And by the way, hi Lisa, thanks for your comment, and please drop in any questions. We're really we love having you here, and just let's hear from you. That would be really great. So maybe something else to add to that is, we often hear this idea of being, taking the higher road, or the, being the bigger person in situations which do anger and frustrate us. Now that's easy to do. Easy to say, harder to do, of course. Yeah. But there is something about that in the context of our own emotional well-being. How can I find a way to transcend those kind of feelings that may be leading to anxiety and tension? How do I find a way to connect with something bigger than the conflict or the tension? And that brings me on to something else in terms of relieving anxiety in family dynamics, or in family situations, because of course that's what we're here for, talking about families, and that's connecting with some bigger ideals, and that we start to talk about our values, we start to talk about our vision for our life, we start to talk about these things which actually help us lift out of a current situation. So for example, in being with Cole in that way, we really get clear on what am I trying to accomplish here, really? What's the bigger picture here? How am I going to be most helpful to myself and to Cole in this situation? And in that way, then we have a reason to work with our feelings. We have a reason to be mindful. We have a reason to just be bigger than the situation, which is really hard to do. And again, with the vision for our lives, if we do, press the nuclear strike button, which oftentimes, we've all experienced doing that, we know that the collateral damage to coming back from that, the toxic residue that is left, is significant, and it costs us a lot of emotional energy and physical energy oftentimes as well, just to come back to that sense of balance. So it almost gets in the way of our bigger purpose in life, our bigger vision. What is this all about? So that's another way to think about how we transcend the kind of daily tensions and conflicts that can lead to anxiety. It's really starting to look at the bigger picture.
Picture. Yeah, no, that's so important. And I know you talked about before we sort of went into, if we kind of give into our emotions, make that mistake, but that a lot of the work of stress relief comes from before those situations happen, right? Mm-hmm. So what are some ways that we can reduce stress in advance?
Yeah, so so we might call what I just described moral elevation. So it's just taking the higher path, and that can be a really useful buffer for our emotional well-being, taking the higher path, but not in some kind of superficial way. It's a deep belief that actually this is better for me to do this, and it's better for the other person. And it's kind of that mutual, that affiliative sense of I'm caring for them and I'm caring for myself. Now, another great buffer for anxiety is finding joy in life. And what are the things that we enjoy? And looking at that word enjoy literally means being in joy. And if we do things more often that we enjoy doing, whether that's partly connected to our work or some other thing that brings us joy, then that creates this natural buffer from stress and anxiety. We can also look at things like challenges, so setting ourselves physical or challenges which maybe stretch us. That experience of stretching ourselves on our own terms also gives us that sense of well-being, and maybe buffers us from some of the challenges that we face, some of the anxieties that we face. Because if we think of that idea of anxiety, a lot of anxiety is about the unknown. And as we take on challenges on our own terms, whether it's running a 5K for the first time or whatever it may be, and training towards that, that in a way reveals more about ourselves, and we start to see, actually, I can deal with that situation, and so I'm not as anxious about it. So it tests our limits and gets to know ourselves a little bit more, and so we're not as anxious about those kind of situations in the future as well. So setting ourselves challenges is another way to think about how we manage stress in advance as well.
Yeah. And I'm curious too, from our viewers, what do you do, for your stress, reducing stress in advance? We'd love to hear that from you. And Kal, just kind of going off of that aspect of challenge, I for myself, I find that so true, in having a project to kind of work towards, and then having that sense of accomplishment and doing things, each day that does bring me joy. I mean, you're just in general, for me, I'm just in general a lot calmer, less anxiety, so that I'm not like a tea kettle where it's just building up and then boop, it'll, start explode. You know what I mean? So I definitely resonate with that for sure.
And of course, we can't omit in something like this all of the fundamentals: sleep, good nutrition, movement. All of these foundational things, of course, are going to either increase our level of stress or decrease them. We're not here today to necessarily talk about those things in particular. We're maybe looking at some of the hidden threats, stress, and some of the hidden opportunities to move out of stress and anxiety in a family context. But of course, those foundational ones are always there. We can always link, problems with difficulties with that, struggles with anxiety to those factors as well, of course.
Yeah, no, that's a great reminder of just that self-check. And part of the awareness, right, is, okay, am I feeling this way? Wait, is it from those fundamental things? So that's a really good point, Cal. And you talked about, or you just said, hidden stress factors. So what are some of them? Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so we often talk about stress as a kind of generic term. So the first thing we would can be helpful is really saying, okay, so when I say I'm stressed, what does that actually mean? Does it mean that I'm anxious here? Or I have a tightness in my chest? Or am I deeply fatigued? Or what is the stress? How is the stress showing up? So that's the first opportunity, is getting to know what stress actually means for us, rather than this generic term of saying, hey, I'm stressed. So that's the number one thing, is to work with labeling and noticing what it's actually like for us physiologically and emotionally. The other hidden threats are things like harboring truth, for example, in our lives. If we're not saying what we really want to say, if we're not communicating what is important to us, and we have these whispers in our mind that are bugging us, that carries a low level anxiety with that, that can cause stress. And other things, of course, we're in the last year, social prejudice has been a massive factor causing stress. And there are basic fundamentals here around safety and stability that are really important to our sense of well-being, our sense of feeling grounded. If we have too much uncertainty, too much chaos in our lives, there's going to be anxiety that goes along with that. We talk about things like financial worries. Some of the more hidden ones, again, are things like boredom. If we're experiencing boredom in our day-to-day, that can show up as as having as a toxic impact on our immune system, believe it or not. So there are these kind of factors, some of which are more obvious, some are less obvious. Another one about people pleasing. I hear that a lot. People say, I can't get over this idea that I have to be seen as doing something, or need to be seen as this person, or making sure that they're getting external validation. That is quite stressful as well. So it's starting to recognize in a really more nuanced way, what does stress actually mean for me? What's causing me stress? And where is it in my body? And how can I work with it in more helpful ways? So it really is a kind of personalized experience. There are, of course, all these generic ways of reducing stress and anxiety, but we really need to be clear on what it's like for us as individuals before we can go down that road of soothing and recovering from anxiety and stress.
Yeah. And I like that too, because that's another checkpoint, right? So you talked about those fundamental things of, exercise, nutrition, sleep, but then that next one of what's hidden there. If you check all the boxes for the first, kind of what else is there? Is it because of, like you said, some financial problems, or is it because you're not communicating your needs, or just any of the examples? I think that's really powerful, and kind of us understanding ourselves and where that stress comes from.
Yeah, and I think we need to be a little bit careful here in not trivializing these things. Say, yeah, of course I know I have financial worries, or of course I know that.
Yeah.
So let's pivot to what the opportunities are to move out of that.
Okay.
And of course, hearing from Devonte here, great to have you here, Devonte.
Hey, Devonte.
Thinking things through and reflecting. Yeah, and I suppose that we thinking about this in the sense that being thoughtful about something and thinking through can be helpful. But when does thinking through or reflecting turn into rumination? Because oftentimes we think up until a point, and then it's the soundtrack that's playing in our head over time that again starts to become unhelpful. So it's again getting a little bit of nuance here. Yes, if we're a thinker or we're thoughtful, that's going to be helpful. But if something's just banging around in our mind, it's going to start to have a detrimental impact. So in those moments, what do we do? Well, if we're starting to overthink, there's only one way out of that realistically. Well, there's probably more, but the best way out of that, out of our head in that way, is to move and to focus on movement, on stretching, on breath, something that pivots away from us being in our mind and getting more active. It could, of course, come in the form of engaging our minds through doing puzzles or talking to a friend or something like that as well. But movement is such a critical one to relieving stress, getting out of our heads. It's fundamental. So coming back to some of the opportunities, the hidden opportunities to manage stress and relieve anxiety. Just this sense of, and again, I have to tread a little bit carefully with this one, of taking responsibility, ownership. Now, that's not only for our actions with other people responsibility, but responsibility for our own thoughts, feelings, sensations. That's not to say we can control what we think and feel, but it's to say, how do we work with our internal world in more helpful ways, in kinder ways? How can we acknowledge that my mind is in overdrive, and then actually I can take ownership to try and find ways to soothe or to get support through a friend or a professional? And it's just starting to say, okay, I'm having these struggles, I'm experiencing them, and I can either find ways or be guided on how to soothe those feelings, or I can go out and find support and get help. And that's what I mean by taking ownership in that way. Other opportunities involve mastering a skill. So if we're getting really skillful at a task or a hobby or whatever it may be, we have this sense of mastery, that really buffers us from anxiety and stress. Just a sense of autonomy as well, just feeling free in what we're doing and not feeling controlled. Again, that's a hot topic, but just feeling this sense of freedom in the way that we experience our interactions with others, finding meaning in what we're doing, connecting, as I said before, with our vision and values. And I did touch on finding challenges, contributing to other people's experience, whether that's through donating to charity or to a loved cause, or if it's donating your time and giving of yourself in that way. Again, I think if you were to say, okay, what's the number one stress reliever or the number one anxiety reliever, we have to focus on movement and just engaging our bodies, and really getting ourselves engaged physiologically and physically, so that we can start to metabolize some of the anxiety that we're experiencing. That seems again very obvious, but it's really just putting that into the sense that, sometimes we think about doing these things, we don't recognize the importance of them, or we get stuck in cycles of thinking, why is this happening to me? And it's like, maybe it's just because we've been sedentary, or maybe it's because we haven't slept well, and understanding these fundamentals a little bit.
Definitely. And I guess there is a reason why that for myself, my best stress reliever in any situation is to go for a walk. So there's a reason for that.
Yeah. And it's funny because, we can get get quite clever about these nuanced techniques and tools. But each time we do, when we go into that kind of level of depth, we come back to some of these fundamental principles, which we all need and are essential to all of us. So there's some guidance there. We'd love to just hear from the audience just for a few moments. Any reflections on what's been said in the last 5 or 10 minutes, or any questions? And again, if you're feeling anxious about asking a question, just notice that, and notice that maybe your value is to contribute, or notice your value is to engage or to connect, and just saying, okay, I'm feeling anxious, but the bigger value here is to connect. So I'm going to put connection in front of my anxiety. That's another example of how we might work with our values in the context of anxiety. Anyone going to drop in a question now? Now putting everyone on the spot. No,
right.
Question. All right.
So as we do wait for our viewers to chime in with us, I know we are getting to about a little over 30 minutes, but I do have one last question I want to be sure that we do get to. And I'll give our viewers just, I'd say, a few more seconds. I think, it takes a minute maybe to type some things. But it's my question, so you can take mental note of this, Kal, is dealing with a difficult family member. Because I think, we talked a lot about how we can work on ourselves, which is mostly, what we have control over. But what about the others in dealing with that? So we'll wait just a couple more seconds.
Okay. Yeah. And maybe just a brief preview of next week, where we'll be bringing our 3-part series, sadly, to a conclusion. But we'll really be talking about balance within families, and that is to say, well, how can we strive to create work-life balance in the midst of a pandemic, but more generally, when we have all these competing priorities and we have great intention, and maybe we are mindful, and maybe we have ways to relieve stress. How do we bake it into the midst of a busy day, a busy week, and just finding ways to restore balance or find balance in the midst of busyness? Yeah,
I like that. Well, I don't see that we heard from anyone, so I'll go ahead and pose this question to you, Kal, just because I'm very curious, is how do we work the stress of managing, whether it be children, a spouse, a partner, teenagers, maybe we live with our parents, who are not cooperating with our efforts?
I think Fran has the answer to this one. to be a pal.
Okay.
Well, okay. So with, I think that's a really important question. How do we? Clearly, we have a set of expectations, or something's, we're communicating in a way, but we're not really getting across what we want to get across, or the ultimate aim isn't being met. So I want to try something with everyone in the audience in the hope of answering this question and doing it justice. So if I could invite all of you just to create a circle with your forefinger and your thumb, okay? And I'd like you to place that circle on your cheek. Okay. Okay.
This is silly.
On your cheek.
Oh, on your. I did not follow directions.
And of course, we don't know in the audience if who what happened there. So
please raise your hand if you did the same thing as me.
please do reflect. And what's the aim of that? Well, the aim is to share that we typically say, we say our piece, but we actually most powerfully reflect how we want others to be by the way that we act ourselves, and we are the model for others, and it's about saying, do as I, being the role model, being the change for ourselves, because we often we act a certain way and have a different set of expectations of other people. So it's just trying to recognize that what we say and do matters ourselves, and that people pick up not on what we say but also what we do, and that's the primary change agent when we're trying to consider how others are being with us. It's getting really honest about, are we being the representation of the person we're hoping someone else will be? So we have, in the ways that we act, we have these hugely powerful influences on other people that go way, way, way beyond what we say, and people are picking up on those. And of course, when we're working with kids, that's the same. When we're working with children, we say no, or we say don't do this, and then they see us and they say, well, hang on a second, you're doing that. Or you're doing exactly the opposite of what you're saying. So it's about consistency and about authenticity, and just staying true to that. And if we are still having problems in that way and communicating, or having someone do what we want them to do, in a sense, maybe it's about renegotiating our expectations of them to a degree, and just saying, are these rules really as rigid as I'm saying that they must be, or can we relax and renegotiate those rules, and can we work with those rules in another way? Or is the other person struggling in a kind of way that I'm not looking at, or I can't see? Are they overwhelmed or overburdened, or have they had experience in their life that means that that's going to be a struggle? So as a saying, just to wrap up here, maybe, which is, when we understand all, we forgive all. And we never really have a 360 view of anyone's experience. We can only kind of guess at it. So even if we're great at communicating, it's about understanding that there is something going on that perhaps we don't understand in its full entirety, that if we did, we would probably be a little bit more considerate of their situation.
Yeah, no, and I think that's absolutely a great thing to leave us off with, a great thought, because we don't understand, and the full picture, like you said, for everyone, and then too, I definitely resonate with that. Modeling is so important over words, clearly, because I didn't listen. So I just want to thank you for answering that question, because that's really impactful. And again, for your time. So as we wrap up this conversation, Kal, just want to thank you so much for being here with me today. And as you had mentioned, we are here again next week on Wednesday at 1, which is the 19th. So definitely be sure to like the Baptist Health page, the YMCA page, and put your notifications on so that you know when we go live. And be sure to tune in with us. And if you have any questions from any part of our series, bring those to us. We'll be happy to answer, or Kal, I should say, will be happy to answer them. And just one last thing, that if you are looking for some help in your wellness journey, or interested in more of our events, there's a link just above us that has our newsletter, and also a little bit more information about our Baptist wellness centers. So be sure to subscribe to our newsletter. But thank you all, everyone. Again, thank you, Kal, and I hope you all have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Jean. It's been a pleasure being here. I look forward to seeing everyone again next time around. And do ask any questions. Drop them in the comments box, where we'll be here to answer them.
Absolutely. All right. Goodbye, everybody.